In architecture school, they teach you how to calculate a load path, how weight travels through a structure until the earth swallows it. No one teaches you what to do when the weight is your name. Avery used to clap a hand on my shoulder and tell clients I was the future of the firm. I wore that sentence like a borrowed suit, too big, a little dazzling, impossible not to scuff. He'd slide a sketch across my desk and say, "Clean lines, Caleb, don't apologize for clarity." I didn't. Not then. We designed bright things for people who wanted to be remembered. Glass that looked like water, stairs that floated, the kind of buildings you photograph because you can't help yourself. I learned the rhythm of late nights, the hum of plotters, the smell of hot paper, the way the office emptied until it was just me and my cursor blinking like a metronome. Avery would pass behind me, pause, and nod. Good. It felt like a blessing. The morning it happened started like any other, coffee too strong, inbox already hungry, a deadline shaped like a cliff. I was laying out a facade detail when the server hiccuped. The shared drive vanished. One pop-up, then another. A flood of errors I'd never seen. Someone shouted from the bullpen. Another voice. "Did you just get kicked?" And then nothing. Silence except for the air conditioning and the sound of my own heart speeding up. 10 minutes later my phone buzzed. Conference room, now, HR. The glass walls of that room turned everyone into reflections. Avery sat at the far end, hands folded, jaw tight. The HR director had a printout she wouldn't put down. The IT manager looked like he hadn't blinked in an hour. Confidential files were accessed and exported at 2:13 a.m. last night, HR said. City Hall's competitor received them at 6:22. We've traced the activity to your credentials. My mouth went dry. My credentials were in the system because I was here late. I left around 1. Check the cameras. We did, it said. You left at 12:57. The export happened from your login after that. Avery finally spoke, careful, measured. Caleb, just help us understand. If something went wrong, say so. Not did you do this. Not I believe you. Just a neat, neutral line that separated the room into before and after. I didn't, I said. I wouldn't. HR slid the paper toward me. Metadata. Timestamps. My username like a stain in the corner of every screenshot. The evidence felt engineered for someone who didn't know me at all, and perfect for people who only thought they did. Take the day, HR said, which meant don't come back. Security waited by the door, not unkind, just inevitable. I packed a notebook and a pen I never returned, and on the way out I passed the lobby wall where our awards hung in a grid. I didn't look up. Outside, the city was all reflection, glass repeating glass. My face ghosted over strangers I'd never meet. The phone buzzed again. A message from Avery, "I'll handle what I can. Don't speak to press." It read like help and felt like distance. By noon, my email password was changed. By 5, my keycard stopped glowing. By the next morning, the leak led the news, and a reporter practiced saying my last name like it was a verdict. Avery didn't call. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a scrap of vellum and drew a single line from corner to corner. A span without support. It looked delicate and impossible and exactly like my life. The next day, I learned what breaks first when a structure fails. Not the beams, your voice. The story spread faster than I could speak. By morning, the firm's name trended across half the industry's feeds, and mine came attached like a cautionary tale. Young architect leaks confidential files, one article read, as if I were a headline waiting to happen. Every line turned me into a shape that fit their story better than the truth ever would. My phone filled with messages I didn't open, some from coworkers pretending to be sorry, some from reporters asking for comment, and one from my mother that just said, "Call me." I didn't. I couldn't. By noon, my accounts were locked, my email gone, and my name scrubbed from the firm's website. Like I'd never existed. The world doesn't erase you loudly, it just stops including you in its plans. I spent that day walking the city, watching my own design stare back at me from the skyline. Corners I'd drawn, windows I'd argued for. The irony was cruel. My fingerprints were everywhere except on my own life. Late afternoon, it rained. I ducked under the awning of a cafe, watching the street blur into gray. That's when I saw them, two of my old colleagues at a corner table, heads close, whispering. One noticed me and froze. The other muttered something and they both looked away. I wasn't even worth gossiping about anymore. I was just a rumor still haunting the wrong floor. I took the train home. The city lights streaked across the glass, breaking into lines of color that looked almost like plans, the kind I used to make before everything collapsed. That night I tried to sleep. Instead, I found myself scrolling through old project files, zooming in on every drawing I made. Every one of them had my name in the corner, neat and black, Caleb R. Vale. I highlighted it, pressed delete, and watched the space go blank. In the morning, I sold my drafting tablet, then my books, then the suits I'd bought for meetings that would never happen again. The apartment emptied quickly. By the end of the week, there was nothing left of the life I'd built except one notebook, sketches I couldn't part with. On the last page, I wrote something Avery once told me. Every structure fails eventually. The ones that last are the ones rebuilt stronger. I stared at it for a long time. Then I packed a bag, left the key on the counter, and walked out. When the train pulled out of the station, the skyline disappeared behind fog. I didn't look back. Because sometimes survival doesn't look like standing tall. It looks like vanishing quietly and learning to start again somewhere no one knows your name. The town I landed in didn't have skyscrapers or skylines, just smokestacks and low roofs that leaned on each other like old men trying to stay upright. It was the kind of place where everyone fixed their own problems and didn't care who you used to be. That suited me fine. I found a room above a hardware store, one window, no curtains, but sunlight that cut through the dust like it belonged there. The rent was cash only, the kind of arrangement that forgot your last name as soon as the bills changed hands. Work came slow at first. A local contractor needed someone to help patch drywall, then someone else needed their roof measured, and before long I was the quiet guy who knows how to draw straight. Nobody called me Caleb Vale. I just signed forms as C. Vale and left it at that. The first winter I learned how to live without plans. My life shrank into simple shapes: work, food, sleep. But the sketches never stopped. At night, I'd sit on the floor and draw buildings that would never exist, houses that folded into themselves, bridges that bent but didn't break, spaces built to survive being misunderstood. One night Manny, the contractor I worked for, walked past my desk and caught a glimpse of a drawing. He let out a low whistle. "You did this?" "Yeah," I said, bracing for the usual questions. He just nodded. "You ever think about putting that to use again? The city's talking about renovating that old library. They'll need designs." The library. I'd walked past it a dozen times, a crumbling stone shell with vines crawling up its face and boarded windows that looked like shut eyes. The idea of touching something broken like that stirred something old in me. Maybe hope, maybe foolishness. A week later, Manny introduced me to the city clerk handling the bid. Small-town politics meant the competition was thin. They needed someone cheap who'd actually show up. I was both. When I turned in my sketches, a modern structure folded into the bones of the old, the clerk stared for a long time before saying, "You really think this can stand?" I almost smiled. If you respect what came before, anything can. They gave me the job. That night I walked back to my apartment in the cold, holding the contract like something alive. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the first line drawn after the collapse. I didn't know until weeks later whose name sat at the bottom of the funding approval, the one underwriting the entire project. Avery Sloan. The same signature that had once erased me was now paying me to rebuild something in his name. And for the first time since I'd left the city, I felt the structure inside me start to shift, quietly, dangerously, like something long buried beginning to rise. The first time I saw the library from the inside, it looked like a body waiting for an autopsy. Dust hung in the air like fog, plaster cracked along the ceiling, and the floorboards creaked beneath every step. But beneath the ruin there was beauty, the kind you only see when something's too stubborn to fall apart. I ran my hand along the stone arch by the entrance. It was hand-cut limestone, early 1900s, worn smooth by a century of readers. "She's seen better days," Manny said beside me. "Yeah," I murmured, "but she's still standing." That became my design philosophy. Don't erase the damage, reinforce it. I drew plans that kept the old structure visible, iron ribs around the cracks, skylights that let sunlight strike the worn marble instead of hiding it. The city wanted something new. I wanted something honest. Weeks passed in a blur of dust and graphite. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up excited to build. My hands were steady again. I even caught myself humming sometimes, pencil tapping against the desk, the way I used to when Avery would walk by and nod in approval. The memory came sharp and brief, like the sound of breaking glass. Then one morning, I saw a name on the email chain for the project's financial oversight, Sloan Architects Limited. My chest went cold. It wasn't just Avery funding it. His firm was directly involved. They were overseeing the budget, maybe even reviewing the design submissions. Part of me wanted to quit right then, but another part, the quieter, older one, told me to stay. The truth had a way of surfacing, and maybe this was how it chose to show up. 2 weeks later, during a progress meeting at City Hall, I saw him. Avery walked in mid-sentence, polished as ever. Gray hair now, tailored suit, the same calm authority that could make an entire room rearrange itself around him. He didn't see me at first. When he finally did, he paused, just enough to reveal that flicker of recognition before the mask came on. "Caleb," he said smoothly, as if greeting an old colleague, not the man he'd burned alive. "It's been a long time." I nodded once. "It has." He smiled the way people do when they want everyone else to think nothing's wrong. "Glad to see you landed on your feet." "Some structures take longer to rebuild," I said. His smile faltered, just for a second, but the meeting went on. He spoke about budgets and deadlines while avoiding my eyes, and I kept mine on the plans, every note of mine now a silent rebuke written in ink. When it ended, he lingered near the exit. "Maybe we can catch up sometime," he said lightly. "Old times, huh?" "Old times don't hold up well under inspection," I said, and walked away before he could reply. Outside, the wind smelled of rain and steel. I stood on the steps of City Hall, looking out at the construction site that would bear both our names. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt structural. After that meeting, Avery became a ghost I couldn't ignore. His name kept appearing in project updates, invoices, signatures, like a watermark on paper I couldn't wash clean. Still, I kept my head down. I told myself it didn't matter who paid the bills as long as the work was clean, honest mine. But the past has a way of testing your stability right when you start to stand again. One Friday, the project manager dropped a folder on my desk. "New design adjustments," he said, came down from Sloan's office. Inside were sketches I didn't recognize, glossy, showy, everything Avery loved. Glass corridors where my steel ribs had been. Synthetic panels covering the raw stone I'd chosen to keep exposed. The revisions gutted the heart out of my design and left it looking like every sterile monument Avery had ever built to his own name. I could feel my pulse climbing. "Who approved these?" "Apparently your mentor did." The project manager gave me a sympathetic shrug. "They said you'd want the firm's input. Prestige, you know." I laughed too quietly, too bitterly. Prestige. That's what they'd called it the first time too, when they put Avery's name on a concept I designed when he told me, "The team wins together, Caleb." I stared at the blueprints until the lines blurred. My chest felt tight, my throat raw. But anger, I'd learned, could either burn you down or build you up. So I redrew everything. Spent the entire weekend in the office, crafting a version that honored both visions, my transparency against his gloss, truth against illusion. On Monday, I submitted it directly to the city board. I didn't copy his firm. The reply came 2 days later. The city clerk called me in. Her expression was careful, like someone about to break bad news. "Mr. Vale," she said, "your revised plans were leaked online before our review. We've already received a complaint from Sloan Architects." I froze. A complaint. They're claiming you violated partnership confidentiality. Of course, it was happening again. Different project, same script. Only this time I wasn't naive enough to think it was coincidence. I went home shaking, sat at my table with the printouts and stared at Avery's note, forwarded through his assistant like a curse. "Unfortunate misunderstanding. Let's keep this professional." Professional. That word had always meant silence when it came from him. I almost tore the papers apart. But then I saw something, metadata in the leaked image, a timestamp from Sloan's internal server. Not mine. Not the city. The same digital fingerprint I'd seen once before, 5 years ago, beside the files that ruined me. I sat back, staring at the screen until it stopped feeling real. He used the same trick, the same lie. Only this time he hadn't erased me completely. This time I had proof. Outside, the city lights flickered against the window, sketching faint lines across my desk. For the first time, I realized they looked less like reflections and more like blueprints. And I finally knew how to build my way out. I didn't sleep that night. My apartment floor was littered with papers, old receipts, draft prints, meeting notes, digital backups on 2 flash drives, one external hard disk I hadn't touched in years. I felt like an archaeologist sifting through the ruins of a life I once had to bury. The metadata didn't lie. The same digital signature, Avery's, was embedded in the file that leaked from the library project. He'd done it again with the same precision, the same arrogance. He couldn't help himself. Men like him didn't fear collapse. They built it into their designs and called it innovation. I sat there until dawn, watching the city turn gray, until I remembered something, an old backup from my last week at the firm. I'd saved everything back then, desperate for any proof that I wasn't insane. Buried among drafts and invoices was an email chain, Avery forwarding internal documents to his personal account. Subject line, "Review for compliance." Timestamp, 3 days before my firing. There it was, the beginning of the end, preserved in my archives like a fossil. By noon, I had everything sorted. A timeline, correspondence, screenshots, proof that both leaks, then and now, had come from him. But instead of feeling triumphant, I just felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when the storm you've waited for finally arrives and you realize you don't want thunder, just clarity. I didn't want revenge, I wanted truth. That afternoon, I reached out to someone who'd once believed the opposite story, a journalist named Myra Jensen. She'd written the first article 5 years ago, the one that labeled me the architect who fell. Her name had been burned into my memory long before Avery's betrayal ever faded. When she answered my call, there was hesitation. "Caleb Vale?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "You wrote about me once. I think you'll want to correct the record." An hour later, we met at a cafe 2 blocks from the library site. She looked different, older, softer around the eyes, but her notebook came out the same way it must have years ago, ready for blood. I slid a folder across the table. "Before you ask, it's all verifiable. Metadata, email chains, server logs, you'll see his signature everywhere." She flipped through it in silence, her brow tightening with each page. When she finally looked up, she said, "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of silence being the only thing people hear from me," I said. She nodded once, clicked her pen and began to write. We talked for an hour. I told her everything: Avery's mentorship, the betrayal, the second leak. When she asked what I wanted from all this, I said, nothing, just accuracy. Before leaving, she said, "You know, once this comes out, you can't control what happens next." "I'm not trying to," I said. "I just want to build something honest for once." When she left, I sat there a long while, watching the steam fade from my coffee. The street outside was full of construction noise from the library site. The cranes kept swinging, cables taut, foundations forming beneath the dirt. It felt poetic somehow. He'd built his empire on lies. I'd just given the truth a blueprint. And for the first time, I didn't feel buried under the weight of what he did. I felt like bedrock. The article went live 3 days later. It didn't explode, it spread. Slow at first, like a crack crawling along concrete, then faster, deeper, until the whole structure gave way. Myra had done her homework. The piece wasn't angry or dramatic. It was methodical. She laid out the evidence like a blueprint: timestamps, forwarded emails, audit logs showing exactly how Avery had orchestrated both leaks, then shifted the blame. My name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't have to be. It was in every paragraph between the lines. By noon, the industry feeds were buzzing. By evening, I was getting messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some apologized. Some pretended they'd always doubted the story. Most just said, "You were right." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence this time was mine. Avery, though, he didn't stay quiet. The next day, his firm released a statement calling it a misunderstanding born from outdated records. But the tone was brittle, the kind of corporate calm that smells like smoke. 2 former employees came forward with their own stories. Another journalist uncovered discrepancies in past contracts. Within 48 hours, Sloan Architects was trending for all the wrong reasons. I watched it all unfold from my small apartment, lights off, screen glowing blue against my hands. I thought I'd feel vindicated. I didn't, just steady, grounded, like a structure finally finding balance after years of stress. Then the phone rang, unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me answer. "Caleb." His voice was softer now, stripped of its polish. "Avery." He let out a slow breath. "You always were meticulous." "I learned from the best." A humorless laugh. "They're eating me alive out there, the board, the press, everyone." "Then you know how it feels," I said. Silence, then quietly, "You could have come to me first." "I did once. You told me to stay quiet." He sighed. "You've won, Caleb. Take your victory." I looked around the room at my worn drafting tools, the rolled plans of the library now halfway to completion, the mug of cold tea. "It's not a victory," I said. "It's the truth. You were the one who made it a war." He didn't answer, just breathing on the line, shallow and heavy, like someone standing in the ruins of something they built too high. Before hanging up, he said, almost to himself, "I thought I was protecting us both." "No," I said softly, "you were protecting your reflection." The line went dead. That night the rain came again, tapping against the window like static. Outside, the cranes at the library site stood motionless under floodlights. For the first time, I realized how much it resembled a skeleton, bare, unfinished, but undeniably strong. I leaned against the glass, watching the city pulse below. The world had turned without me for years, and now it finally tilted back into place. Avery had built monuments, I'd built silence. And somehow, mine was the one still standing. Tomorrow I'd go back to the site. There was still work to finish. The morning of the grand opening came with sunlight so clean it almost hurt to look at. The city had polished itself for the occasion. Fresh banners, new flowers planted along the walkway, the faint smell of paint still clinging to the air. I stood across the street for a while, just watching people file in through the glass doors I'd drawn from memory months ago. The building looked exactly how I imagined it in the sketches, old bones wrapped in light. The stone facade was still cracked in places, but the cracks had been filled with steel, not hidden. They gleamed in the sun like veins. Manny spotted me from the steps and waved. "You're not gonna stand out there all day, are you?" I smiled and crossed over. The mayor was giving a speech about heritage and innovation, the kind of phrases architects learn to stop hearing. I didn't listen. My eyes stayed on the building, the way the light bent through the atrium, catching the dust like glitter. People walked inside without knowing every measurement, every beam, every argument buried beneath that beauty. Inside, the air smelled of paper and new beginnings. Kids ran down the corridors that used to be rubble. Volunteers shelved books under the skylight I'd insisted on keeping, and for a second I thought, this is what forgiveness looks like when you stop waiting for it to come from someone else. Near the back of the main hall hung a brass plaque listing the contributors. The largest name, as expected, Sloan Architects Limited. Underneath it, in smaller letters, Design Consultant, C. Vale. I laughed under my breath. It was perfect. The man who tried to erase me now shared credit with the name I'd built on my own. The symmetry was almost architectural. "Feels right, doesn't it?" Manny said beside me. "It does," I said. "It really does." Reporters moved through the crowd snapping pictures. Somewhere, someone mentioned the article again, how Avery had resigned, how the firm's reputation was still unraveling. I didn't add anything. I'd said everything that needed saying the moment I stopped defending myself. I walked to the upper level where the old balcony used to bow inward. From there, the view stretched out like a blueprint turned inside out. People reading, sunlight spilling across the floor, quiet everywhere but alive with motion. I leaned on the rail and closed my eyes for a moment. The hum of voices below became the sound of the city, measured, layered, stable. A child's laugh echoed up from the stairs. It was high and sharp and innocent, and something inside me eased. I didn't realize how long I'd been waiting for that sound, not from the world but from myself. When I opened my eyes again, the light had shifted. Afternoon, warm, golden, the library walls caught it like a mirror. I took one last look around, then headed for the exit. Outside, the wind caught the edge of my coat and carried the scent of limestone and rain. I stopped at the steps, turned once toward the building and whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "You held." Then I walked away, the crowd's voices fatting behind me, the structure standing firm in the sun. Some things don't need rebuilding. They just need to be seen standing again.